Hello, everyone. I'll ask you to please start making your way towards your seats. Yeah, we'll start shuffling people. Everyone can start making their way towards their seats, please. We'll start in just a minute.
Well, I thought for a moment there we were going to uncharacteristically be on time for a Pearson event, but we waited the customary 3 minutes so that everybody could get up to the Max Bell because it's quite far away and uphill, so here we go. It is an honor to welcome everybody here tonight to celebrate Pearson's 50th anniversary. For those of you I haven't had a chance to say hello to, it's a pleasure to introduce myself to you. No, it's not a pleasure to introduce myself. That doesn't sound very humble. It's great to meet you, everybody. My name is Jason McBride, and I'm the head of college proudly at Pearson. A sincere thank you to our host this evening, the Honourable Ralph Goodale, and the team here at Canada House who has been exceptional in the run-up to today's event. We really do appreciate their hard work. Thank you also to Phoebe and Rowan, who are going to blush as I point them out at the back of the room, for all the work to make this week's events and tonight's festivities happen, so I really do appreciate that. Thank you also to Minister Doughty for being here, other panelists and special guests. Malala Yousafzai and her team will be joining us shortly. If you missed that memo, you're going to be pleasantly surprised this evening. Laurie Sterling is here as our board chair. I just want to say hello and thank you to her for her support. Other members of the board include Yaz Ramahi. I'll talk about him in a moment, and he can wonder why I will talk about him, but I'll leave him in suspense for a moment. And to other members of the International Office who are here tonight, so thank you for the support. Thank you for coming out. I will say a few words about Yaz just to thank him for his generosity. He sponsored tonight's evening, so without him, you would not be drinking or eating, and so we do appreciate his generosity, so please join me in welcoming Yaz, or thanking Yaz Ramahi. I've been given a small timeout signal from Rowan. I assume that's aimed at me. All right, so we'll wait. Well, hello. Perfect timing as we're just about to kick off. So Pearson College has been a symbol of international education since 1974, when we started welcoming 200 students per year to the shores of Petter Bay on the unceded and traditional territory of the Chianu and Beecher Bay First Nation. Today there's an event happening upstairs honoring and recognizing First Nations people, and we do as much as we can to be good neighbors on the land that we were given by the federal government, and which is now currently the land around us is being returned to the Chianu Beecher Bay people. We're proud to be good neighbors with them. Now more than ever, it is essential for us to equip young people to cross divides, to act with honesty, integrity, respect for one another, to respect the international differences that exist in the world, to honor and respect the differences of opinions on a multitude of problems that face us right now in the poly crisis. This year, we've celebrated 5 decades of bringing together students from all over the world, and it's been remarkable this year as we've celebrated from Chile to India. We celebrated in Victoria with the Honourable Bob Rae, who's the UN ambassador for Canada. Came in, and it was pretty amazing because he went up to the podium with a 10-minute speech written in 3 bullet points on a napkin and spoke for 32 minutes about Canada's role in the world. It was amazing to watch, and if you've ever had the honor of listening to Bob Rae speak, you'll know what I'm talking about. The 50th has been a time for us to look back, reflect, and in many cases reconnect with either those that we went to the college with, if you are alumni, but also to take a look at the program. At the same time, we've been looking inward, outward, and forward at the same time to see what we want to preserve, but what we also want to evolve moving ahead. Along with the International Office, 17 other United World Colleges around the world, 150 plus national committees, and the International Council, we spend time interrogating what is it that a UWC is and needs to be in the 21st century. We spend time taking a look and collaborating on ways to widen and deepen our impact. It is a running joke that UWC folks know each other so well that that's part of the magic and also part of our downfall, as we don't necessarily talk enough to those outside of the UWC bubble to help spread and widen our impact. We also spend a lot of time thinking about our financial sustainability. In a scholarship-heavy model across 18 schools and colleges, we're always taking a look at how can we widen the opportunity for students to come to the college so that irrespective of their financial luck at birth, we're able to fulfill any and all need as much as possible. Our 50th anniversary's tagline of Unite, Inspire, and Act serves as a call not only to reflect on our duty in the present day, but also that reminds us that upon graduation, that's when we have to continue to give back to the movement and keep sustaining our sort of drive towards a more peaceful and sustainable future. So I hope tonight is a chance for some of you to reconnect with that mission. On campus, we also continuously reflect on bringing the mission to life in the programs, opportunities, and support. Great examples of the work we're doing over the last little while include the launch of the first of its kind Climate Action Leadership Program a few years ago, 3 years ago now, and we see the second cohort coming through this May for graduation. The CALD program features a competency-based approach to leadership in the modern world in a way that sort of takes a look not at just the subject of leadership, but the skills and competencies of leadership as well, specifically through a sustainability and climate-focused lens. But it's also a lot more than that. The CALD program's also been a place where we've been able to put a lot of our reconciliation efforts into motion, including honoring Indigenous knowledge systems and building relationships with the elders who hold that knowledge. Those relationships have impacted the wider community for students on campus and is currently reshaping how we teach theory of knowledge to more fully embed the Indigenous pedagogies, Indigenous ways of knowing for all students and not just those who are in the CALD program. This year, we've also been busy piloting what we're calling the Ripple program, and that's a series of 90-minute workshops that explicitly teach the skills related to anti-polarization, covering topics such as perspectivism, using curiosity to delay judgment, and turning debate into dialogue. We then use scenario-based approaches to explore our homegrown okay, discomfort, hurt, and harm continuum so that everybody can voice their opinion on different aspects of the world, not to convince one another that they're right, but to genuinely understand one another. The program aims to have Pearson students develop their own anti-polarization skills in year 1, before then in year 2, teaching others on campus and off campus. And it's those off-campus virtual and in real life connections that we're hoping that's where the Ripple comes from, hence the name of the program. For a small campus in the woods with an audacious goal to make the world more peaceful and sustainable, it's always a busy campus at Pearson. You'll hear a little bit more, and we'll touch on Ripple a little bit later when we talk to the panelists, when we're talking about cultivating peace in today's world. But before and after that panel, we have the great fortune to listen to not one, but 2 incredible speakers here this evening, the first of whom I'd like to introduce now. Having been in Canadian politics since he was first elected to the Parliament of Canada in 1974 at the tender age of 24, also happens coincidentally to be the year Pearson was founded. He's held posts provincially and federally, including roles as the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Minister of Natural Resources, Leader of the Government in the House of Commons, Minister of Public Works and Government Services, Minister of Finance, I've run out of fingers, and Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. He became High Commissioner for Canada in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in 2021, and it's my honor to welcome to the podium the Honourable Ralph Goodale.
Jason, thank you very kindly. Bonsoir tout le monde. Bienvenue à la Maison du Canada. Salutations et meilleurs vœux du gouvernement du Canada. We are delighted that you are all here this evening to celebrate the wonderful heritage of Pearson College, a heritage that touches the entire world. We're pleased that a number of the distinguished alumni are able to join us tonight, including Minister Stephen Doughty, a stalwart friend of Canada, and now, of course, in Mr. Starmer's government. And later on, we will all enjoy a presentation, I'm sure, from Malala Yousafzai, who is a beacon of light and hope and determination for the rights of women and girls and the cause of education around the world. But welcome to you all. You're in a centennial building. This Embassy for Canada is celebrating 100 years in this location on Trafalgar Square this summer. So enjoy that heritage this evening as well. And thank you for what all of you do in your own individual ways to strengthen humanity in a world that is badly out of kilter these days. As Canadians, we certainly feel that discombobulation in our suddenly difficult relationship with the United States. Our erstwhile ally and partner and friend has turned out to be a very cranky neighbor, attacking Canada on a variety of tariff fronts, none of which hold any shred of justification, and all of which actually violate the existing trade agreement between Canada and the United States, which Mr. Trump himself negotiated and signed. Worse still, the American attacks on Canada have been explicitly expressed as a denial of our sovereignty, as if we have no right to exist, as if it's the manifest destiny of the United States to own us and control us. That is an existential threat that Canadians take very seriously. For more than 200 years, we have been very good neighbors in North America, but with overwhelming unity, Canadians assert that we are not Americans and we have no intention of becoming Americans. Needless to say, Canadians are surprised, they're angry at the attacks against us, but we are still clear-eyed and focused and steadfast and more united than I've seen Canadians united around anything for decades. Our response to this situation includes 6 elements. First of all, senior Canadian officials are keeping in very close touch with all of their U.S. counterparts to ensure that there is an open and continuous flow of communications. Secondly, in open messaging to all levels of government in the United States, federal, state, and local, in both parties, in business groups and labor, to community organizations, in public advertising, and the news media, we are driving home the key message that American tariffs are American taxes imposed by the American government on Americans themselves. They pay the bill. They are inflating their own costs and prices. They're damaging their own jobs and growth. They've destroyed, quite literally, trillions of dollars of value on their own stock market, and they need to hear that truth. They also need to hear, and this is the third point, they need to feel the consequences. And that's why we have implemented Canadian retaliation, measured and calculated, with counter tariffs against about $60 billion worth of U.S. exports so far, tailored to have maximum impact in the United States, minimum consequences in Canada. Our retaliation is significant because Canada is the biggest market for 36 U.S. states. We buy more American products in Canada than do the British, the French, the Chinese, and the Japanese combined. When they attack Canada, they are attacking their best customer. Fourthly, federal and provincial governments in Canada are implementing a range of support measures to help both workers and businesses affected by this abuse flowing from the United States, to help them get through this. There is no complete shield. There will be damage that will be irreparable in some cases, but government can support business and workers to ease the burden, and we're doing that. Fifthly, we're building a bigger and better Canadian economy to be more successful regardless of what any foreign power might try to do. Reducing internal trade barriers, smoothing regulatory processes, accelerating science, technology, innovation, building more strategic infrastructure more quickly, incentives to drive more new business investment, and trade diversification that will reach far beyond the U.S. market. And sixth, we know that our ultimate success depends on the united determination of Canadians sticking together. Every measure we take to defend Canada must therefore be demonstrably necessary, effective, and fair to all Canadians together. That's where things stand at the moment. It's still early days in this very strange situation. To add to the confusion, there is a federal election underway in Canada right now, so we'll see where things go from there. Voting day is the 28th of April. But let me turn to a more sublime topic, and that is the Right Honourable Lester B. Pearson, the namesake for Pearson College. He was a truly remarkable human being. As a young person interested in politics, I had the privilege of meeting him for the first time 57 years ago this month, just at the end of his term as Canada's Prime Minister. We are so proud that Lester Pearson was a Canadian whose life's work at home and abroad was dedicated to resolving conflict, building harmony, reducing disparity, and nurturing the conditions in which freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law might flourish for all of humankind. A veteran of the First World War, Mr. Pearson was Deputy High Commissioner here at the Canadian High Commission in London at the beginning of World War II. In fact, we have a desk up on the second floor that was his personal desk. He was sitting at that desk one day in 1940 when a bomb fell right in front of the Admiralty pub across the street. And Mr. Pearson just kept on at his desk. He was a principal architect of post-war multilateralism, which for 80 years helped to raise living standards in many places around the world and kept us away from another global conflagration. He helped to lay the groundwork for both NATO and NORAD, and, of course, the United Nations. And he invented the concept of international peacekeeping, for which he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Mr. Pearson then, after all of that, became a member of Parliament, leader of the opposition, and ultimately, between 1963 and 1968, the Prime Minister of Canada. Interestingly, through that period of time that he was Prime Minister, he never once had a majority in the House of Commons. It was always a minority government. But he led one of the most productive governments in Canadian history. He produced the Guaranteed Income Supplement for low-income seniors and the Canada Pension Plan for all working Canadians, which is now one of the most successful sovereign investment funds in the world, including investments right here in the United Kingdom. He created unemployment insurance and implemented universal public Medicare, modeled very much along the lines of the NHS. He presided over a greater sense of unity and cohesion between and among French and English-speaking Canadians. He guided Canada's centennial celebrations in 1967, and he gave Canadians our distinctive red maple leaf flag. His name on your college is a great tribute to your institution. It's also a great challenge, because living his legacy means constantly striving for a better world. It means more ambition. It means working always for a higher quality of life for everyone, leaving no one behind, and standing up for what you know is right. Thank you for accepting that challenge in your own way and wherever life may take you, and best of luck in all of your Pearsonian endeavors. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner, and for drawing attention to the fact that we have a high bar to live up to, living under the moniker of Lester B. Pearson. And it's something we take very serious. It's one of the reasons why we wanted to take a program like Ripple and make it so explicit in the experience for all UWC students that come to Pearson College. I would like to invite our panelists for the next section to take the stage right now. I'm going to read their biographies up from here before I join them on the panel as we move into this next phase of this evening. Don't want you to get too rowdy, so I'm going to ask you to hold your applause until I do all 3 biographies, and then you can get as raucous as you wish. Minister Stephen Doughty is the Minister of State for Europe, North America, and the Overseas Territory in the United Kingdom. He has previously worked for humanitarian and international development NGOs, including World Vision UK, Oxfam GB, Oxfam International, and Oxfam Saimaru. Stephen has served on the Wales, Home Affairs, Arms Export Controls, and International Development Committees in Parliament. He also chaired the all-party parliamentary group on HIV and AIDS and was a member of the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly. Most importantly, of course, this evening, he is a Pearson alum from year 23. Elisa Engel is the director at Citizen Architects, a practice leveraging architecture to effect social change through community interest projects in the UK and sub-Saharan Africa. She began her career designing schools for the UK's Building Schools for the Future program before moving to Botswana to design and deliver a youth center on behalf of Architecture for Humanity. Alongside her practice, Elisa teaches social entrepreneurship, international collaboration, and participatory practice for architects at the University of Arts in Linz, Austria. When I practiced this earlier, I said Australia repeatedly, and I'm very proud of myself right now that I managed to say Austria. Yeah, so close, right there. Together with her colleague, Catherine Leet, she recently developed and ran the first UWC short course for adults to make sure that alumni felt tied to the school, and it's been entitled Tools for Changemakers. Elisa is an alumna of Waterford cum Laba in Eswatini, where she attended from 94 to 96. And our third panelist is Leah Gray, a British diplomat currently heading a conflict resolution team in the Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office. She began her career designing financial incentives for renewable electricity generation before spending several years engaged in UN climate negotiations. From 2014 to 2016, she was seconded to the French presidency program, leading negotiations for the Paris Agreement at COP21. Her most recent overseas posting was at the UK mission to the UN in New York, where she worked on Middle Eastern issues and led the Security Council efforts to support the implementation of the Colombian Peace Agreement. She also happens to be Pearson alumna, year 22. A note before you make some noise for our panelists that Stephen and Leah are both speaking in their personal capacities tonight and not on behalf of the government, so shape your questions later accordingly, okay? Now please help me welcome our 3 panelists. Welcome. So I mentioned earlier at the outset, talking about Ripple a little bit, that it's something we're excited about at the college. This 2-year multi-part workshop series aims to have students learn, practice, and then teach others the skills and dispositions needed to combat both real and perceived gaps between people that exist in the world right now, both online and in real life. One thing I didn't mention, but really nicely coincides with the launch of that program, is that 2025 was named the UN's International Year of Peace and Trust. Mr. Goodale spoke about US-Canada relations, so I'm not going to dive too far down that rabbit hole about how that's going in our International Year of Peace and Trust, but we'll get back to the Pearson and UWC movement. Our conversation over the next 25 or so minutes before we open up to questions from the floor is going to be centered around cultivating a culture of peace. Cultivating a culture of peace. We're going to look at a few different angles, exploring how UWCs have done that in the past, take a look at what we need more of in the future, and then dabble a little bit in how physical spaces on campuses and around the world contribute to that goal of peace and sustainability as well. So let's dive in. So we have 2 questions for each of our panelists, and then we'll open it up to the floor to go from there. So the first question is for Minister Doughty. Can I call you Stephen? Is that okay? It's a mouthful a moment ago. I appreciate that. Formalities out of the way. Now you're alumni, all right? As your head of college, okay? One of the things that we talked about in the lead up to the panel was taking a look at you looking back at your time at Pearson and thinking about the experiences or friendships in many cases that shaped much of your sort of personal and professional practices. And I wanted to see if you could share with us sort of a memory or two that sort of have helped shape who you are and the multiple roles that you've held.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, High Commissioner, and to the college for having me here this evening. And I'm very much putting back my 16-year-old Stephen hat on, not the minister hat. And you know, I'd grown up in a small town in South Wales. I'd never been on a plane before I went to Pearson, so this was a huge, you know, dramatic experience in my life, and one that very much has shaped the things that I've been involved in. And I always come back to two fundamentals, really. One is what Pearson actually said himself, which was, how can there be peace without understanding, and how can this be if people don't know each other, right? So it's that personal connection and understanding each other as human beings, number one. And the second thing was very much something that was inherent in what Kurt Hahn had envisioned when he first set up Atlantic College and what became the UWC movement, which was that common shared experience, whether of adversity or of adventure or of creativity or of involved in a positive project, how that would bring people together regardless of what their political or religious or ethnic origins or other beliefs would be. And that was why it was so crucial as well to get people at the age of 16, where they had some ability to engage and to do things in a practical way, but that their views hadn't become so ossified that they weren't able to experience and learn from others. And I think back to a couple of experiences I had. Interestingly, today, with my minister hat on, I've actually just been meeting Canadian First Nations leaders who are visiting London. And what was incredible was I was able to start that meeting by saying, before we get going, you know, I had the honour and privilege to study in Canada on unceded land of the Chano and Beecher Bay nations. I studied alongside Heshkut, Nutchalnut, Inuit and Cree classmates. I knew nothing about Canadian Indigenous history, culture, language, ways of understanding the world, of land, of sustainability, of the oceans before I went to Pearson. And yeah, I was able to participate in cultural activities, to talk to my classmates from those backgrounds and to understand their lives and their experiences. And that's something that's lived with me my whole life. And then I'm able to apply that very much in a sort of a professional capacity today. The other one, which I regularly come back to, is in relation to Ukraine. Literally, I think the first week of my time at Pearson, we had an orientation camp, and we went to a classic sort of Canadian sort of woods camp somewhere up island, I think somewhere near Shawnigan Lake. And we had to do all the tests. We had to do the swim test to prove we could swim, and we had to do some adventurous activities. And I had all these adventurous activities before I did the swim test. So one of the activities was to go out canoeing into the middle of this lake, and I was paired up with a young Ukrainian student, and we very, very ambitiously made our way out canoeing into the middle of the lake really, really fast and so on, and managed to flip the canoe in the middle of the lake, and it sank, and we were suddenly sort of, you know, in distress in the middle of this lake. But
and this was before your swim test.
Yeah, before,
right.
yeah, crucially before
that was your
the swim
inadvertent swim test.
This was our inadvertent swim test. But we helped each other, and we got to the shore, and it sounds, you know, kind of cliche and cheesy, but in a situation of adversity, here, this young 16-year-old and the 17-year-old Ukrainian who'd never known each other were helping each other get to shore, proving we could swim, but also, most importantly, surviving. And Ukrainians I work with today, and I was in Kiev a few weeks ago, sometimes say, well, how did your connection and love for Ukraine start? And I say, well, look, a Ukrainian literally helped save my life in the middle of a lake in Canada when I was 16. So the reason why I give those two examples is that it's sometimes not the lecture in the Max Bell or the international relations seminar or the class, and however wonderful the IB is and brilliant teachers that inspired me at the college. It's those really personal experiences that live with you for the rest of your life and that shape how you then engage with people. So I just give those as a couple of examples.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's amazing how in the digitally connected world, sometimes the conversation revolves around like how much of the UWC experience can be replicated by being online only, and the answer is not enough. The idea of bringing people together, even though it's an expensive, carbon-heavy model, that the elephant in the room is always carbon footprint of flying people all around the world, but replicating that in-person, the in-between experiences, the things that just happen organically, like
brushing your teeth in the morning. The thing I always think back to was standing alongside the counter in the washroom, and you got 4 religions, 4 continents, brushing our teeth, late for class, you know, having had some drama with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you know, hungry, sleep deprived, right? That's common human experience, okay?
That sounds like the day before I left Pearson. It's the same experience now, so it's good to know that things haven't changed. Leah, for you, similar question. You know, what part of your Pearson experience have had the most pronounced impact, do you feel like, on the person you are today?
Sure. So similar question and in a way a similar, although potentially less dramatic answer. So yeah, a big part of my Pearson experience was really the unique privilege we had as students at the college of living in such an incredible, unique, natural environment. That was actually a key factor in my putting Pearson as my first choice when I applied to UWC, and one that I really embraced while I was there through joining diving activity, taking environmental systems for the IB, working with Gary Fletcher, my environmental systems tutor, on the process through which Pearson College became ecological guardian of raised rocks. Exactly. So, I mean, a lot of time spent either in a wetsuit or a yellow suit is basically what that boils down to. But yeah, I think the kind of serious part of that is that through all those experiences, I really learnt about environmental stewardship and what that meant in a very kind of tangible way, and how a core component of that was honouring First Nations relationship to and knowledge of the land. You touched on this in your remarks at the beginning. Jason, Stephen, you brought this up too. I know it's something the college has done a lot more on since I was there, and I'm really excited to hear more about that when I am back at the college for my reunion this summer. So yeah, I would highlight that as one thing that I've kind of carried with me as I've then gone on to work in the field of environmental diplomacy. And otherwise, I think, you know, thinking to how I've kind of pivoted more recently to work, say, on conflict, and kind of similar to Stephen, you know, my first introduction to many of the country contexts that I've subsequently engaged on was at Pearson, was turning up as a, you know, British state school educated, like ostensibly high achieving, but incredibly ignorant 16-year-old, meeting people from countries I'd never heard of, and you know, hearing about kind of conflicts I didn't know the first thing about. And that kind of stayed with me to the extent that 20 plus years later, you know, sitting around the Horseshoe in New York for a Security Council debate on the Middle East, say, I would find myself thinking back to that evening early in my first year when the Arab and Israeli colleagues gathered a few of us impromptu in the admin building and, you know, talked to us about their lived experience of that conflict. So yeah, I think it's hopefully helped me to try and avoid falling into the trap that I think it's all too easy to fall into when you're a diplomat working on things from at a remove, you know, from capitals or UNHQ, of kind of being a bit disconnected. And so, yeah, has kind of stayed with me as a need to keep seeking out and hearing those kind of direct testimonies.
Thank you for that. One of the advantages of being together with 200 other students is when you do end up in a situation where you refer back to the Ukraine or a situation in the Middle East, is you can think, what would so-and-so have said? What did I learn from that person? And that perspectivism of having those multiple voices in your head in a good way is a remarkable sort of outcome and outgrowth of the UWC experience. So thank you for sharing that. So Elisa, small pivot, and I'm really glad that you're here on the panel because you give us a different view than sort of us looking at Pearson specifically and looking at how the skills that we're trying to teach in Ripple that were either implicit always in UWC or now trying to be taught more explicitly are really trying to impact the world and bring people together. So the thing that I'd like to ask you about is your work with citizen architects uses architecture projects as a means to foster dialogue and resolve conflict, to sort of strengthen communities through dialoguing about the project itself. What are some of the skills and tools you've seen that have led to success for your projects? Because then we're just going to steal them and add them to Ripple.
Fantastic. Look forward to it. I think this conversation is so UWC, and I love it. I think that's something very specific about UWC is that I hope every UWC student graduates with an understanding of the immense investment that's been made in them, both financially and, as you say, in terms of the carbon footprint now. And with this sort of idea that there's a responsibility to somehow make this count, not just for yourself, but for the wider world. So, no pressure, you're 19, but all this money has been invested. And I think some careers, one might say, sort of lend themselves more easily to answering that question. I think there's a sort of straight route to international relations, which is fantastic. But not every UWC student goes into that kind of field. And I think for me it's quite important that UWCs don't become leadership academies. And that what we take away from UWC are skills and values and a kind of way of looking at the world that is applicable in all contexts. And just to give Americans slightly better press this evening, my American co-year, Ruha Benjamin, is a professor of African American studies at Princeton, which I imagine is an interesting position right now. And she writes about this kind of plotting. So it's kind of finding your plot within your agency and within your community and your profession, and working on how to build social justice or environmental justice from that position. And that's very much what I've been trying to do in architecture. And the way we do that in our project work is that with citizen architects, every commission that comes in, we kind of look at and think, how can we possibly leverage this architecture project in a way that strengthens communities? And very often what that means is that we don't unilaterally design in the way that people imagine architects do, but instead we try and really think who's got a vested interest in this place and whose voice do we need to hear in the design process. And ideally really early on when the brief is written, not when the colors are chosen for the carpet. That's really important. And so we do this also for local authorities. For example, we did this for Westminster Council in Maida Hill, where that's a deprived part of Westminster, one for the Canadians that exists in Westminster. And there was a lot of conflict, both within the community and between the community and the council around access to resources, but also antisocial behavior. But what we found was, because there was investment in a particular place, and money promised to spend on that place, we could bring together this working group of people who started off very conflictual, but once they actually started thinking about a vision for how they wanted to spend this money and what opportunities might arise out of that, it's that sort of stopping to look at each other in conflict and started looking at something with a view towards something that might happen in the future that seems to unlock this, and that's kind of really exciting. And then finally, our practice is based in Exeter, and we're really lucky to be located in a beautiful old church hall, which my business partners Catherine and Pierre, and Catherine is in the audience tonight. They've bought this, it had been disused, they bought it off a developer and turned it back into a community hall as well as an architecture practice in their home. And that's where we ran the very first UWC short course for adults, which you mentioned, so that has come full circle for me.
Thanks. The idea of gathering around a shared purpose from multiple perspectives is really what UWC is about, and that's kind of the work that you're doing as well, is when you have multiple perspectives or multiple needs, getting together and just having a conversation about it is already a step that seems sometimes like it's a step too far in the world right now. Dialogue around the world often looks like dialogue, but it's a series of asynchronous monologues thrown at each other online. And coming together around a shared purpose is something that I really admire for architectural purposes, but for anybody who brings a social justice lens to whatever they do. At lunch today, we were talking with another alum who, I don't think he's here this evening, but we were talking and touching upon something that you mentioned there, which is the idea that sometimes coming out of a UWC, you feel like there's only a certain number of majors and careers that you can go into. And I'm here to publicly dispel that notion that we need people, yes, we need people who are fighting for Greenpeace and working in the nonprofit sector, but equally we need people to apply all of the skills and a social justice bent, a climate focus in business, in engineering, in medicine, in all aspects of life, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a stay-at-home parent, however that is. So I want to publicly dispel the message that if you went into finance, you somehow failed as a UWC student. Quite the opposite. We need people in all manners of business having that influence. So I appreciate you touching on that. Leah, I'm going to pivot to you. It's a similar question to the one that I asked Lisa, but when you reflect on your past and your current roles, being around diplomats and politicians for your entire sort of working career, you don't have to apologize for that either, but just kidding. No. I beg to differ. I'm here to let you off the hook as well. But when you take a look at all the people you've worked with, whether it's yourself or other people that you've admired, what are the one or two sort of skills or dispositions that you've seen that you're like, that lends itself to developing a culture of peace, to bridging divides, to bringing people closer together?
So it will probably not surprise you to hear that the UN climate negotiations were quite a rich arena to be observing what kind of behaviours and skills were needed to bridge positions and bring people together. Obviously, incredibly complex negotiations, engaging existential issues for states in a whole range of different ways, quite divergent starting positions, but a process that only advanced by consensus among the 193 signatories to the convention. So within that context, what I observed to be effective was people who had, so negotiators who had the instinct to get round as many different delegations as possible, even or almost especially those that didn't agree with them, to hear where they were coming from, hear about their concerns, and also the skill, when they were in those meetings, sitting across from a counterpart, to just listen, and not to be, you know, or at least not in a first instance, kind of coming in to respond to points made or to put your own across, but just having the ability, almost the discipline, to just sit, suspend judgment, listen with curiosity, both so that you are, you know, really developing a picture of what their interests are and what underlies those, but also so you're, you know, importantly kind of making that person, that delegation feel heard. And actually, when I was then in the French presidency team in 2015, this was considered to be so important that for the second week of those negotiations, we instituted an arrangement whereby a senior French diplomat was kind of made available for the admittedly quite short window during the night when there were not formal negotiations happening. None of us was really sleeping by this point, but I think him least of all, for any delegations to come to if they had an issue that was really important to them be taken into account in the final agreement, but they didn't necessarily want to put on the table in plenary. And the ambassador would just listen as they kind of explained what this issue was, why it mattered. And again, I think the effect of that was twofold. It was, on the one hand, like quite a savvy intelligence gathering tool for us as the presidency, so that we were trying to avoid any hitherto unknown issues preventing in the endgame country X from joining consensus. But it was also crucially, you know, conveying the message that every delegation, no matter their size or clout, you know, their voice was valued and would be listened to. So I think, yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying I think the disposition to be getting out and listening to people, especially if they disagree with you, and the skill to be kind of, yeah, actually doing that.
And in a high risk scenario too, like nothing like
sure.
the future of the world hanging in the balance. Honestly though, right?
And no sleep, and yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. Stephen, for you, I mean, you've been in the nonprofit and governmental sector for quite a while. What are the things that you've seen, either the things that you feel like you do well, or things that you've admired in others where you're like, that's something to emulate?
I mean, leading on a little bit from what Leah said, I think, you know, this is not rocket science. Listen to other people, right? Secondly, be kind. And thirdly, accept that there are lots of people who don't agree with you and don't agree with your perspective on things. That doesn't mean they're bad people. And you know, having some greater awareness of that. And I think one of the problems, and you were talking about with the Ripple program and the polarization effect that goes on, particularly with social media, is that social media, all it does is encourage you to broadcast your view, and even then without any subtlety whatsoever. And I'm as guilty of that as a politician as anybody else, and in my social media work when I was in the NGOs and stuff as well. You know, there's too much shouting, too much broadcasting, and far too little listening. And you know, I'm a tribal politician in one respect, you know, and I've been in one party all my life, and I'm proud of that, and it fits with my values. But equally, it often surprises people to know that one of my best friends in Parliament until the last election was actually a Conservative politician on the other side of the aisle, who, Ralph's looking shocked, but who literally voted in a completely different lobby from me on pretty much every single vote, but is a thoroughly decent, kind, principled, full of integrity human being who was trying to do the best for his constituents. he just happened to have a different economic and social and governmental philosophy from me. And we spent a lot of time together in private conversations and just supporting each other through the trials and tribulations of life, and finding that sort of common humanity and that common space, whilst accepting there was, you know, a lot of stuff that we didn't agree on, was absolutely crucial. And I've tried to apply that in lots of different situations, and certainly from my rather hot-headed sort of youth and even younger period as an MP, I've tried to become a bit more measured and balanced in what I say. That doesn't mean I'm not capable of, you know, putting out some pretty tough lines or tough negotiations or whatever it might be. But I think, you know, if you're not willing to take that time to listen, to understand, to take the time of listening actually to some of the people you most disagree with. But the only thing I would add, and this is this little caveat, and I think this applies to the whole UWC experience, and I think it's really crucial for the colleges today, is there are a lot of very serious and very difficult challenges in the world, and there are also genuinely some very, very bad people and some very, very bad forces that can lead to some horrific things, and many of the people in this room have seen and experienced those directly. And I think we also need to make sure that we don't give, you know, a sense of you know, dreamland to graduates of, you know, our world colleges today, because you also have to have some toughness and some skill to know when that listening and gentleness and kindness has to stop, because somebody is fundamentally threatening your life, the life of your fellow country people, your ethnicity, your religion, your, you know, sexuality, whatever it might be. And I think, you know, finding that spot is a tough thing, and that's the job of being human, right? So I think, you know, equipping people with those crucial skills of listening and understanding and willingness to appreciate different viewpoints, but also not giving people this rose-tinted view of the world, because it is a very difficult place. And I think more than ever, it is crucial that we equip UWC students with those two things.
Thank you. We hosted a movie a couple of months ago. It was a student-led initiative, adult-supported. It was a movie called The Other Zionists. And I was leading a workshop based around some of the Ripple skills, and I was in a room full of 100 educators. And I asked them, put your hand up if at your school right now you'd be willing to host a movie called The Other Zionists, which, if you haven't seen it, it's about 20 years old. It's about a group of Israeli women who believe that the state of Israel should exist, but not to the exception of a Palestinian state. And so these women work at the checkpoints to make sure the Palestinians are treated fairly as they cross the multiple checkpoints up to dozens of times a day. So we hosted this movie, and of course, and the other educators in the room, all from not UWCs, nobody put up their hand. One person kind of put up their hand. They're like, not brave enough, the ground has not been set. And that's what UWCs do quite well, is we try to create this space where people can understand context and nuance. And that led to a workshop that was led that I started to mention the other day, where one of the questions that students were unpacking afterwards was, does being pro something automatically make you anti the other thing? And the nuanced conversation that went on of course that doesn't mean that. And then we talked about how do your behaviors reflect that belief. And so genuinely listening, being tolerant until the point where you shouldn't be tolerant is an important line for everybody. But I think in the world right now, we often feel like we're being tolerant, and we're not necessarily. We're being quite reductionist and quite black and white. And I'm always amazed by the students on campus who are able to have those conversations, including a student who's here tonight. I won't call them out necessarily, but they left a mark on me last year when they made the comment sometimes that there's so much going on at the college that if the college were just to create a structure for us to have these conversations, students would more willingly engage. And that comment directly led to us launching Ripple this year, because it stuck with me when we were discussing the situation in Gaza last year. And I will find them later and thank them for that directly. And if they know who they are, then thank you for that. It stuck. So we're going to make a small pivot and take advantage of some free consulting, because she's sitting up here on the stage. And so we're going to go back to Eliza for a second. And what we're going to do is this. Pearson is just about to start the demolition of what's called the LLT or the ATM, depending on your vintage of when you were at Pearson. But we're gutting that space to turn it into something called the Social Innovation Lab, which we started raising money for a while ago but hadn't quite hit start on. We still have the ability to affect the inside of the space, even though the outside shell is fairly fixed. But we have a chance to really change what goes on inside it, so that not only is there a home for Ripple, but we can use that space to reach out off campus and leverage the UWC kind of conversations for those outside. What are a couple of the things that you've seen, or some of the key elements that lend a space to contributing towards dialogue and peace because of the design features that are embedded within them. Go, you have 30 seconds to redesign our space. Go.
Here we go. I mean, I think it's a totally fascinating brief. When you told me about Ripple and about this new space, I was like, wow, what a project. I mean, the really obvious thing is obviously you're trying to set a space where, in terms of how you position yourself and how you sit or stand in the space, creates an environment where you can have equitable and comfortable conversations. And I think it needs to be flexible enough to allow you to do that at different scales. And, you know, at the moment, for example, we are sitting here on high, lording it over the audience, holding forth, you know, amplified as well, it's amazing. You know, the setup of the room very clearly says whose voice is most valued right now. And then we'll change around later. But another example is the British Parliament, and you talked about having a friend across the aisle, but the British Parliament is set up for conflict. And I think it's easier to see this when it's not working well, or when it's set up like that, than the opposite. So the British Parliament is set up, you know, with two banks facing each other, two parties very clearly in conflict, and then a power structure with the front benches and the back benches, and the speaker, I believe, right? So that's the opposite of what you're trying to create, I imagine. Interestingly, also, I think when you're in a bigger group, it's important that everybody sees each other, so you want to set yourself up in the round, whereas if you're talking just the two of you, very often it's easier to have difficult conversations when you're not facing each other, which is why people go out of their way to go for a walk or go for a drive to have a difficult conversation. But it sounds like at Pearson you've got ample opportunity for beautiful walks, so I think you're very lucky there. And then it's obviously an inclusive space. You need to make sure that the acoustics are right and the light is right, especially in a place where, not just because people's potential kind of impairments in those areas, but also because you are in an environment where most people don't speak their first language, and being able to see someone's lips is really important when you're speaking. And so all of those things, but that's sort of the basics. The other thing that struck me is that I think one of the most conflictual relationships we have, and one of the most abusive relationships we have, is actually between us as a species and the natural world. You know, that's where we're having, and I think we forget that this impacts us as bodies. We think of these negotiations as something that just happens between minds, and conversations just happen between minds. And that made me think about all the times you're asked to have really difficult conversations in really hostile environments that might be very fancy and they might have cost a lot of money to create, but everything it says to you as a human being is that this is a hostile environment. You can't see your way out, you don't know, you know, you can't see who's coming in, you don't know who's overhearing what you're saying. You know, you don't have an outside view. I think that's really important. You don't have natural daylight. You might just have, you know, and in those situations when your body is already slightly tense because you're kind of, you know, you're on the defensive, you're then asked to have these difficult conversations. So, you know, I think that relationship to the outside world is really important. You know, to bring that sort of beautiful campus you have at Pearson in, you know, have it maybe. Yeah, be visible. And we talk a lot about overly processed food and how bad that is for us as people, but overly processed building materials are also really bad. They're really bad for the environment, and my industry is terrible for the environment. It's like, you know, it's really dirty industry, construction. And we're trying to turn that around very quickly, but not fast enough. Over-processed building materials can never go back to being something as useful as they currently are. Whereas if you try and stay with the fresh materials, if you go for wood and stone and clay plaster, then those things go back to being exactly what they were, not exactly what they were before. I mean, but you know what I mean. Like they can be recycled at the level. So I think materials are really important also because they're tactile. You know, you give that there is something about being surrounded by the natural world that enables us to be the best humans we can be. So, but yeah, I'm jealous. I want to see what you do.
I'm sure we'll talk more as we design it, but I do appreciate that. We have a few minutes if there's questions out in the audience for our panel. Phoebe, do we have a microphone floating around there, or do you just want people to holler at us in this oppositional, confrontational setup up high?
Exactly.
Speak, people, to the higher panel. But is there anybody in the audience that has a question for Kotaro? Phoebe, up close.
Hello, I'm Kotaro, year 41 from Japan. First of all, thank you very much. It's beautiful that, although we may be 20 years apart, but I can completely resonate with the stories you're sharing from the campus. So, quick story. So when I left Pearson in 2016, I moved to New York City. And although when I moved to Pearson, I never felt homesick, but then I was severely homesick to Pearson. Why? Because when I moved to the States in 2016, it was election time for the first Trump presidency, and everything I believed in on campus was kind of denied. So I felt quite lonely, and I quite frankly regretted the decision to join the American, educational institute instead of the Canadian one that I had on offer. But then I decided to stay in the States because I felt like that was the mission, right? Because we were kind of given the opportunity to live in the utopian environment for 2 years so that we could kind of share these values and mission. But then it's not that easy. So I'm curious to hear your stories on how you feel like you were able to share the values of Pearson or UWC to the people, quite frankly, might not have believed in the same values. Because I think that's what we really need to do at the moment.
Thank you for the question. How do you leave the utopian bubble of a UWC and enter the world and not lose hope, but actually have an impact on a world that doesn't necessarily have the same values that you had that led you to a UWC in the first place? Small question.
The most direct experience you have of it as a politician is on the doorstep with your own constituents. And one of the things I hate the media and others say about UK politicians, they say we're divorced from the reality. Actually, the UK political system means you're very close to it. And, we knock on doors, we speak to our constituents, we hold surgeries, we engage on social media, we have our emails, letters, you're exposed to a lot of views. And when you go knocking, you can literally have people with the full spectrum of views raise them with you. And I think I take a similar approach that I mentioned earlier on, which is that I try and find some point of commonality, of something positive that we can do together for the community or on a particular issue, rather than getting down the rabbit hole of the one thing where we've got clearly very, very oppositional views. I draw the line, obviously, at somebody who comes and answers the door and is absolutely to their face racist or homophobic or threatens me or my team or otherwise. But most people are decent, good people. They don't necessarily have the same view. They might have a different life experience. They have other things demanding their time and attention. Most people are struggling to get by. They're doing multiple jobs. They're worried about the safety of their community. They're worried about the sick family member they have. And I think it's always looking beyond what that initial interaction is with somebody. What they present with, like in medicine, is often not necessarily what's actually going on. One of the constituents I dealt with when I was a caseworker years ago, before I became elected myself, and he had been banned from speaking to his local council because they said he was being angry and aggressive on the phone. And I just let him get this whole thing out for 20 minutes on the phone to me. And then I discovered that really what was going on was that his wife had terminal cancer. They were living on the 4th floor of a building. He wasn't getting proper social services support. He wasn't able to get her down the stairs. He was at his wit's end, and that was what was expressing his frustration and the things he was saying. And when we were finally able to get to that and engage with all of those issues, this was a decent, hard-working guy who'd given his life in service and other things, but was just in a terrible period in his life. And I think 90% of people I still believe are good people. It's just what's going on in their life at that time, and that's what I try and practice.
Yeah, to echo that, kind of assume good intentions until proven otherwise. Try and find the common ground. Equally, be clear on what your values are and where you draw the line on what you need to kind of, ensure your own resilience and sustain you. And I suppose maybe more so than when any of us left the college when it was still snail mail. You might be kind of better able to connect with your community virtually and kind of draw on them. But otherwise no unique insights. I'm sorry you had that experience in New York. I loved my experience in New York, and I found it a little bit separate from the politics of the rest of the country. But
We have Global Affairs coming up on April 17th, and the guest for that event is former Prime Minister Joe Clark. And about 2 weeks ago, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, he wrote an article in the Globe and Mail urging, extolling Canadians to write letters. He was talking snail mail, but emails to their American friends. Because what he was trying to draw the line between was who we are in our foreign policy and who we are as human beings. So this idea of reaching out instead of withdrawing is even more important when we run into sort of conflict and difficulty. But it's exhausting, constantly reaching out, right? It's much easier to talk to those who we already agree, but there's very little to be gained by that in terms of bridging divides at the same time. So thank you for the question. Other question?
Hi, thank you so much for your insightful discussions. I really enjoyed it. My name is Rahila and I'm from Afghanistan, and I went to Pearson College from year 2003 to 2005. And my question is more directed to Elisa. When you talked about curating inclusive spaces, immediately the discussion between President Zelensky and Trump came to my mind, and how you could see a power dynamics. Not that I want to remind you of all that conversation, but given that UWC is spaces where there are a lot of international students, they come from different background of or level of privileges and perceptions and equality and marginalization and vulnerability. How could UWC colleges could curate education spaces where it's inclusive and where power dynamics are adhered to, and how can we then mirror that if those who goes to leadership, we don't see again that side of that kind of power dynamic negotiation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my background is, and my first sort of passion in architecture was designing schools. I think you mentioned this in the introduction. It's, and I find that absolutely fascinating. My college, Waterford, was very much designed with a model in mind where you have, groups of 25 students or so, and there's the teacher at the front who tells the truth, and then everybody else writes it down in a notebook and then repeats it. And that obviously in no way matched the actual teaching that was happening at Waterford. I think it matched it in terms of the format, so it was very much frontal teaching. But, the discussions were very equal despite that. But, if you were designing something from scratch, I think what you'd really want to do is to design spaces that that are suitable to the different ways in which knowledge is transferred. And I thought it was really interesting what you're saying with your initiative at Pearson about kind of including the different ways of knowing in the theory of knowledge module. So you'd want lots of different and differently shaped and differently sized spaces. So you can learn, there's much more peer learning going on, and much less of that sort of frontal arrangement. So I think the diversity in terms of the spaces is really important. And then the community will move in and kind of use those in whatever ways seem right at the time. Sorry, this is not a very specific answer, but it's quite a big subject.
If there's one more question out there, Leah and Elisa are able to stay a little bit later this evening. Stephen has to run. He's got multiple engagements, and we're grateful for his time. But is there another question in the audience before we get to our second guest speaker?
Hi, thank you all for speaking. My name's Iman. I'm Canadian and Nigerian, and I'm a year 48 graduate of Pearson. My question, as a recent graduate, leaving Pearson and going out into the real world, I found that a lot of people, especially my age, obviously don't share my values. And with the internet, people are becoming increasingly polarized. I want to ask, in terms of, obviously we hope to grow and enter spaces, whether that's in business or in government, and help make positive decisions. How do you rectify this idea of doing what you feel is right and following your values, but also understanding that in a lot of ways you will be making decisions for people who don't have the same values, and trying to find that equality of what's right for you culturally, religiously, politically might not be exactly where I stand, but I want to find a common ground between us.
Mr. Politician.
No, there are people who are out there who share your values and your views and your beliefs, and it's finding them. And I think somebody said to me once after leaving Pearson, look, there are a lot of amazing people in this world, and some of them went to UWC and some of them didn't. So don't equally just look amongst the graduate community. I mean, I was very lucky. I actually went with my best friend then onto university, and I think we spent a bit too much time together at the start and not actually engaging with other people. I've made some amazing friends from other UWCs. I'm godfather to the kids of one of my friends who went to New Mexico, and we used to sit on the UWC committee together, and she's done amazing work with MSF in Yemen, and has just been in Gaza, and you know, they're brilliant people I've met through UWC. And then there are just amazing people I've met who never went to UWC or had a very different experience and connection, and still share those same values. So you know, I would remain hopeful and optimistic, and you will meet those people and you'll get to work with them, because your values and your instincts will naturally lead you to them. And I think it's about finding those spaces where you can work on positive things together, and whether that's in a local community or on an international NGO, either way you're going to find them. And this thing again about what careers people go into, I mean, in some ways I'm the ultimate, you know, sort of UWC cliche, and yes, I do meet other foreign ministers at meetings, and then we go, oh, you went to UWC, oh, and you meet this, right? You know, one of my fellow years, she went back to her home town in Ireland. Her two sisters live around the street from her, and she sometimes felt a bit sort of pressured about, you know, that people go on to be foreign ministers and so on. But she's made an immense difference in her community, working with people in the creative arts sector, in local sustainability initiatives. Her husband's very involved in running a local scout group and doing amazing work with them. She's brought up 3 amazing kids, one of whom's just gone to UWC, and has had a huge impact in her community in a way that I'm not able to, because I'm traveling around doing all sorts of other things. So, you know, people are making good and doing good things in all parts of the world and in all different contexts. So you will find them. So stay true to your values is what I would say.
Thank you. On that note, Stephen, Elisa, and Leah, please join me in thanking our panelists. So it's been a wonderful evening already, but we're not quite done yet. An introduction for this next speaker doesn't even feel like it's necessary, but I'm going to do it anyways. Born in Pakistan's Swat Valley, Malala's journey towards becoming a symbol of resilience began in 2009, when at age 11 she started blogging about her experience as a girl being denied the right to education under the Taliban regime. She bravely spoke out in the face of adversity despite immense personal risk, and in 2012 survived an assassination attempt while on the bus home from school. In 2013, she co-founded the Malala Fund, which aims to empower young women to become leaders in their communities and advocates for policy changes to ensure access to girls' education around the world. Her unwavering determination to champion education for girls everywhere earned her the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014, the youngest person to ever receive this honor. Do you ever get tired of hearing about that? Yeah. In 2017, her ties to Canada took a giant leap forward when she was not only awarded honorary Canadian citizenship, but also became the youngest person ever to address the Canadian House of Commons. Her work to fight for safe, accessible education keeps her busy, which is why we were incredibly grateful and thrilled when she accepted our invitation to speak to us here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Malala Yousafzai.
Hello, everyone. Honourable High Commissioner Goodale, Honourable Minister of State Doughty, Mr. Jason McBride, esteemed guests, alumni, students of Pearson College and the UWC network. I'm really excited to join you all today to celebrate this occasion of Pearson College 50th anniversary. Congratulations. I must confess that as an honorary Canadian, I feel right at home here at Canada House. Thank you for having me in this beautiful and historic place. I'm reminded of my visit to Ottawa in 2017, when I addressed the Parliament and met many inspiring Canadians. There's one thing that I always admire about Canadians. You know the world is interconnected and you believe in cooperation to advance peace and justice, to make life better and fairer for everyone. And while you are humble and polite, you leave your imprint wherever you go, inspiring others to dream bigger and work harder. And just a fun fact, at Malala Fund, we have had a Canadian at a time always. One of our former CEOs was a Canadian, and when she left, then I thought about bringing somebody else to my team. So now my communications person has worked with the Prime Minister, so now he's on my team. Anyway, just make sure, keep an eye, because I am keeping an eye on all the incredible Canadians to come and work with us. I want to talk about Pearson College. It is an institution of learning, and it has its legacy. Your graduates earn a deep understanding of global issues and develop sharp critical thinking skills. I had heard about the legacy of Pearson College, but today I saw it as well. For 50 years, you have educated generations of movers, shakers, thinkers, and leaders. Today, as so much of the world turns inwards, we must celebrate the values that make us strong: diversity, compassion, and the pursuit of education. I'm filled with optimism when I meet leaders like you who uphold and embody these values. Today, I am thrilled because we are announcing a new chapter in this incredible legacy of Pearson and UWC community. We are creating a brand new scholarship for Afghan and Pakistani girls. In joining the Pearson and UWC community, these girls will benefit from an exceptional, life-changing education. This new program will open the door to a bright future for these girls, and I'm grateful to Pearson College for launching it. I'm sincerely humbled that this scholarship bears my name. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to play a small role in lifting up this next generation of leaders. By joining your ranks, these girls will make enormous contribution to Pearson and back in their communities. Girls in Pakistan and Afghanistan are just like girls everywhere. They are resilient, they have brilliant ideas, and they are ready to change the world. All they need is for leaders, and like those here today, to place their confidence and trust in them so that they can realize their dreams. Today, together, we are recognizing the voice, the agency, and the potential of girls. We are matching their determination with action, hope, and opportunity. As we celebrate this announcement, we must bring our attention to the state of girls' education globally. The truth is that we face a global crisis, and we must take urgent action to address it. I have devoted my life to fighting for the rights and resources that all girls need to deserve and complete 12 years of quality education. It is my mission through my organization, Malala Fund, and we fight for it each and every day. When my father and I co-founded Malala Fund, we started it with a vision where we wanted to see every girl having access to a quality and complete education. However, it was just a dream. 10 years ago, we could never even have imagined that today we would be making an impact, helping millions of girls enter classrooms, holding leaders accountable to live up to their promises, and keeping girls' education on the global agenda. Our model is based on working with local activists on the front lines. And we draw our inspiration and solutions from girls themselves, who know exactly what they want from their governments and how their education can set them up for success. I saw this firsthand on my recent trip to my home country of Pakistan in March. In my remote village, which is also my parents' birthplace of Shangla, where I spent a lot of my childhood, I visited the school that my father and I built nearly 10 years ago. And Malala Fund continues to support that school. When I received the Nobel Peace Prize, it came with a cash prize as well. And I dedicated that amount to starting a school in that village because there was no higher secondary school for girls. And that area was also called one of the most difficult areas to work in because it's up in the mountains, it's far away, and there are so many challenges. And we set this goal that if we can make it happen in the most difficult part of the country, we can make it happen everywhere. So today, and I got to see it in person, these girls are thriving in that institution. They're planning on becoming doctors, engineers, scientists, pilots, astronauts, teachers, you name it, anything that you could imagine. This generation of educated girls is reshaping the community, brightening the entire region with the promise and opportunity. This is the story that I want to replicate across Pakistan and across the world. And I know that every girl holds the same promise as my friends in Shangla in Pakistan. But despite the progress we have made, the deck remains stacked against girls. The right to education and the resources they need to learn are under direct and growing threat. War and conflict often claim girls and schools as their first victims. As we heartbreakingly witness in Palestine, Sudan, and Congo. Funding cuts are impacting the most vulnerable people and organizations in countries where the crisis is most severe, depriving them of already limited resources to go to school. It has even impacted the grantees and the activists that Malala Fund is directly supporting. And in this time, we are doubling our efforts to ensure that those organizations can keep the work going, to continue helping girls in access to education. Many governments also fail to invest in classrooms and teachers, especially in rural and remote areas. In my home country of Pakistan, millions of school-aged girls remain out of school. In many places, regressive regimes are outright denying girls their fundamental right to learn. Nowhere is this more widespread and evident than in Afghanistan, where the Taliban have banned all girls and women from education past grade 6. Since their return to power 4 years ago, their criminal regime has sought to erase girls and women from public life altogether, depriving them from their right to learn, work, gather, and even speak freely. This extreme oppression is recognized as gender apartheid, a term that is coined by Afghan women themselves who are resisting the Taliban on the streets of their country and in exile around the world. In their courageous defiance, many Afghan girls and women continue learning and educating in secret, from radio programs to mobile apps to underground schools. I am amazed at how Afghan girls find creative ways around the Taliban's strict surveillance and brutal crackdowns. All they want is to learn about math, science, and all the subjects that they are deprived of. Malala Fund is proud to support and fund the heroes who make this work possible through alternative education tools. We work with the Afghan activists to ensure that Afghan girls keep learning in this most difficult time where their right to education is denied. We also work directly with Afghan activists who relentlessly fight for accountability and action from world leaders. We are proud to support them by championing the global campaign to have gender apartheid considered and recognized in international law as a crime against humanity. We're advocating for accountability against the Taliban for the extreme crimes that they are committing against women. Today, Afghans are seeking solidarity and commitment from the global community in their courageous campaign to hold the Taliban accountable. I ask you all to join them, learn about gender apartheid, demand your government recognize their crimes against girls and women under international law, lift up Afghan women and girls, and consider supporting organizations like Malala Fund who support their work. I have been an activist for quite a long time now, and I'm not planning on slowing down. In fact, I feel like it's just getting started. When my journey began, I experienced injustice in my community. I refused to let the Taliban silence me, and I shared my story with anyone who would listen. My message to everyone here today is that you have a powerful voice. I hope you will use it to fight for girls' education. You may not realize the difference you can make by educating just one girl. A girl fighting repressive regimes, constant bombings, and strict norms. Everything can change with an education, with a scholarship, and the power of your support. I am extremely grateful for all the support that the Pearson College is offering, and I'm deeply, deeply honored to be here and to share this moment with all of you. Thank you so much, and happy 50th anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you for your inspiring words. The only way that Malala ended up here tonight was through the efforts of three remarkable women in their own rights. Anne McClelland, who is the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and former Pearson Board Chair, started the process by connecting us with Farah Mohammed, who was the former CEO of the Malala Fund, who connected us with Maria Kanita, who of course then led us to Malala. So it was a series of very strong women that got us to this point. So it's very fitting that we start a scholarship in Malala's name at Pearson College for the purposes of peace and promoting access to education. What I would like you to do right now, Malala, if you wouldn't mind, is to come up to the front for a moment just to pose for a picture with the letter of intent so that Alex can snap a picture and then we can make sure that it actually happened. So, join us up here. Thank you so much. We are almost to the informal part of the evening where we get to mix and have a beverage at the back. But as we get close to the end, I'd be remiss if I didn't invite you all to sort of take collective action as UWC alum or those connected to the movement in considering how you can support the college as we look ahead to our next 50 years. When we were at the Victoria 50th anniversary, we had a session where people took their wooden name tags, new wooden name tags, for those of you that remember those fondly. We gave out new ones, and on that, we asked them to write down an action that they plan to take as a result of being at the 50th. Some of those actions included reaching out to an old classmate that you know you should reach out to, but you just haven't quite yet, or liking, following us, sharing our content on social media to expand our reach. We asked people to share their stories of what they're doing in the world from all different backgrounds, irrespective of where you're having an impact, because you all do have an impact. We asked you to consider hosting what we call an event in a box, and that led to the reunion that was in Chile, where our team can support you with all the materials you need to host an event not just for UWC alumni, but can you imagine inviting other like-minded people that spread the reach out beyond the UWC alumni to have conversations about how to make the world a better place? And lastly, I'd invite you to continue, start, or restart supporting the college's fundraising efforts through annual giving, endowment, and legacy gifts. We continue to rely on philanthropy to raise more than 20% of our annual scholarship fund, and the only way we're able to make sure that access to education, which is a tremendous alignment between us, Malala, and her team's foundation, is to make sure that there's enough money to do that, to meet any and all designated need. If there's ever been a doubt in your mind about whether access to education and access to the 2-year transformative model that Pearson has, I want to take a moment to read you a letter from a student. We couldn't bring students with us today for this trip, but I wanted their voice to be represented here. And I've read this letter a dozen times, and every time I read it, I get a little bit emotional. And I'm not going to do that, so if I need to pluck out an eyelash or something to make myself feel tough, then I might have to do that. But I'm going to read this letter, and I'd invite you to listen deeply about the resonance of access to education and what Pearson College and the UWC movement does. This was a letter that was developed, or it was a statement that was developed because Rowan was working with some of our new students this year, our year 51s, to listen to their origin story. And I want to share this with you from a young man who's from the Congo who came to us via Uganda. I did not grow up dreaming of studying abroad because dreams like that never belonged to someone like me, a Congolese refugee in Uganda, trapped in a reality where survival overshadowed hope. My childhood was marked by war, loss, and suffering. When I found out about UWC, it felt like a joke. A refugee like me from a camp where dreams are luxuries we cannot afford. No one believed in me, not even my teachers. But something inside of me refused to let go. I sold my bicycle, my goat, everything I had to afford the journey to the capital for the interview. That night I slept on the street, terrified, unsure if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. In the morning I walked 6 kilometers to a place I had never been, acting like I belonged among students who had never known the kind of hunger I did that was deep in my bones. I kept my story to myself, afraid that if they knew the full truth, they would turn me away. Then 2 days later, the impossible happened. I was chosen. I was going to Pearson College. I still struggle to believe it. How does a boy from Nakavali refugee camp end up in Canada? How does someone who was once invisible become seen, valued, and supported? Pearson is not just a school for me, it's a second chance at life. It's the family I lost, the warmth I never had, and the community that finally tells me, you matter. It's where dreams are not allowed but encouraged. Yet even as I sit here writing this, thousands of miles from home, my heart aches for my family. My mother, my siblings, still trapped in the same suffering I escaped. But now I have a purpose. This scholarship is not just for me, it's for them. It's for the beginning of a story where I do not just survive, but I rise. One day I will make sure my family and my refugee community rises too. If there's any question that Pearson College has made an impact for 50 years and fully intends to have an impact for 50 more, we continue to make sure that access to education for those with promise and potential can come to the college and fulfill their dreams and help elevate their communities. We are privileged to connect with you, Malala, to your team, to offer that scholarship and opportunity for somebody from Pakistan or of Afghani origin. And we thank you all for being a continuing supporter of Pearson College itself and the UWC movement overall. I want to thank the High Commissioner for his words this evening. I want to thank our panelists for being here. And I want to deeply thank each and every one of you for taking the time to come tonight to recall and reconnect what makes Pearson College and the UWC movement so very special. Thank you very much.